The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us early. We're going to get started promptly at 1 p.m. So we'll speak to you in a minute. We're going to get started in just a minute. Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Experian today for our webinar on single customer view. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you of a few things if this is your first time joining us. First, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A chat, and we'll get to all questions at the very end when we open it up to the audience. And secondly, the webinar is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be sent out a few days after this session today. So let's get started. Great. So Erin and Jeff are going to join us as well. Hey guys, I can kick off. So first, we wanted to give some background on who we are and who you're going to be hearing from today. My name is Jordan Tetler. I am the Product Marketing Manager for Experian and the Data Quality Services. I've been with the business for 5 years now, and I run the strategy behind our thought leadership and product marketing team. And I'll pass it to you, Erin.
Thanks, Jordan. Erin Hazelhorn. I'm Director of Analyst Relations here at Experian. I've been in the industry, for over a decade now. Certainly speak with industry analysts, conduct market research, speak with our clients. So excited to share some of the insights that I've learned over the years about today's topic. Over to you, Jeff.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining, and really excited to be talking about single customer view today. I have a lot of experience in identity resolution and fully appreciate the challenge and the nuance in this space. So hopefully we can provide some good information that could help you and your organizations on this journey.
Great, thank you. So what are we going to be chatting about today? We're going to start by looking at the single customer view, what it is, why it's important, and the role data quality plays in the single customer view. Following that, we'll have a fireside chat. So we have some prepared questions for both Erin and Jeff, and we'll be able to deep dive into their experience and what a single customer view can do for you. And at the very end, we'll open up questions to the audience, and so we can hear from you guys and what Erin and Jeff have to say around your questions. And we can jump on in. Awesome, Erin. So I will kick it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Sorry, just going off mute there. Well, again, thank you everybody so much for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking the time. And what is a fairly hot topic right now in the industry. And just to get us started, want to cover a few market insights around what we're seeing from a single customer view perspective. These are some statistics from our annual global research benchmark report. You can see that party data, customer data, it certainly plays a role in what people are thinking about. And this is not surprising because we see in the analyst community that party data, that customer data, is the most widely used data set. So it's certainly of interest to us at Experian. And we see, with the push to digital, right? We all over the last year started doing a lot more things on a digital basis, interacting with brands and with companies in a digital way. We're seeing that in a post-COVID era, as much as we can call that, more people are putting an emphasis on data than ever before. They're trying to gain insights. They want to streamline their operations. They want to better understand the customer and the journey that they're taking with their organization. All of this is really critical to digital operations, and it's becoming, more relevant. We're seeing this increased interest in digital because the consumer changes that were brought about by the pandemic, really many of them are staying. We're adjusting some of the things. The consumer is always changing in how people want to interact with the business. And while many consumers are returning to in-person, for shopping and various interactions, they expect the digital option to still exist. And that digital option has worked really well. And to have that option, data is a really critical component. And over the past few years, we've heard a lot about the benefits that data can provide, but we're also seeing where organizations really haven't been able to live up to the promise of data. And there are many factors that contribute to this. We're going to get into a fair amount of them today. We all have a lot of data. There's no shortage of data at this point. Big data, not really talking about that anymore. It is just data. We have a lot of data within all of our organizations, but there is a big difference between having the data and being able to make sense of that data and being able to drive insights from it. Contact databases that you see here are just scratching the surface when it comes to data across the organization. So much data lives across the business. I actually attended a Gartner conference a few weeks ago where they said, they're expecting in the next few years that over half of data isn't even going to live in databases anymore within an organization. It's going to be in other data sets, right? So we're seeing data that is highly distributed. And how do you, put a strategy in place when you're thinking about that data that's very spread out? It's a perfect storm of really having data distributed across the organization, but also battling low levels of quality around the data, which you can see some of the statistics here mentioning, right? We're dealing with, a challenge of having common identifiers and the quality of that information and pulling it together. But, really trying to action the data really comes, at trying to pull information together to gather insights. And so we're seeing this rise in terms of interest around single customer view. I saw search data results recently where, a few years ago, we saw a handful of people, 15 or so looking at single customer view. Now it's over 1,000 accounts searching for single customer view. That change took place in a 2-year time frame. So we're seeing a lot of interest around it. But before we go any further, let's talk about what is a single customer view. All right. One of the challenges that we see around single customer view is that there can be variations around the definition. So let's start with a common definition that you can see on the screen, a concept based on unifying all instances of a customer to a single record, and in many cases cross-links all the data pertaining to that client in one trustworthy view. And so when we think about the data environment that exists today, with data spread out all over the enterprise, we need to find a way to pull that information together from these different sources and find a way to action that information. And we're not talking about doing this just for one-off instances, right? There's a wide range of use cases where we are looking to leverage this data as organizations. And that is much easier said than done. We have data that is in different types. It's spread across the business. There's different types of insights available for each consumer. You could be wanting to pull together financial information, transaction data, behavioral information. You may have that data within your four walls. You may be working with a third party to pull in some of that information. The sky's really the limit in terms of the variations that you can see on this type of data and the types of insights and the structure in which that data exists. And so what's interesting is we hear from Gartner that while 96% of companies have started their journey towards single customer view, only 14% have had success in terms of achieving it, right? So there is a big uphill battle here of knowing we want to use this data, but then struggling to make sense and build this single customer view. And that is due to some really key challenges. And when we think about pulling together a single customer view, one of the biggest issues is the quality of the data. Now, when I say data quality, that has different definitions to different people sometimes across an organization. For many business practitioners, this just can mean, do I trust the data? Do I trust the information that I'm working with? That's a bit different than the definition of, say, a typical data practitioner, where they're looking about measurable quality of that data. Is it accurate? Is it complete? And you can see from some of the information on the screen where we've seen data quality be a challenge. Another issue that we are seeing is that organizations often don't have the same definition of a single customer view. There's some cultural issues here as well, right? So you can see that there are different groups who need to get different information about the data. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's very common, right, to have different needs around a data for somebody in marketing, say, versus somebody in finance. But one of the challenges that we'll see with single customer view is that there's a goal to do this kind of once, pull all the data together, have this one central repository, and we're going to have everything run off this one repository. Problem is, you can't often come to an agreement, right? So if you can't come to that agreement of what you want your definition of that single customer to be, you may be, as an organization, pouring tons of money into an exercise trying to create that single source of truth, but really different people across the organization need different versions of that data to be able to solve for their use cases. So just as an example, right, if we think about somebody in marketing, they're wanting to pull together very specific personas of information. They may have segmentation that they're doing around specific buyer types and pulling information together for a marketing campaign. Somebody in finance is looking to pull data together maybe on a household level for billing and being able to send out invoicing, and the types of information that they need and the way they want to segment that customer information is very different. So again, a lot of organizations have already invested in single customer view, but they may not be able to succeed. And there's some, really some key ways around some of these challenges that we need to start tackling. A lot of that, in my opinion, and in a lot of what I've seen around the industry, is we need a more agile way of thinking. How can we get certain information pulled together to get a decision or get certain data sets for specific use cases? How do we think about that on a use case basis instead of trying to have this one size fits all model? We're going to need a different data culture. We're going to also need, as part of that, more agile technology that isn't focused on moving all the data into one place in permanent storage. That's not going to happen in today's landscape. So one of the best ways to start tackling this challenge around single customer view is to deal with some of these problems and think about them in a more agile way. And let's talk about data quality, right? Since that is one of the biggest ways and biggest challenges that is impacting single customer view. There are a lot of common ways that we see data quality impacting the efforts to pull together a single customer view. By nature, you're going to have duplicate records across an organization. It could be the same customer information stored in different places. You could have duplicated those across different files. They could have some variation in terms of the type of information within each file. You could have customers who create duplicate accounts in a digital environment. You could have placeholder information maybe that gets pushed in, where it makes it difficult to match the records easily, right? Some of those items are listed on the screen. And many of those involve data governance standards where maybe you struggle to pull the data sets together. You can also have incomplete information on the customer where maybe certain groups collect information, or you have certain form fields in an online form where you don't in others. And it never really gets pulled together. You may not have a clear definition of how you want to pull data together in an easy way to harmonize those records, or you need variation depending on the use case in how you want to pull that data together and to harmonize it, which again leads to some challenges. So all of these things that I've just mentioned make a big difference, but they aren't the most challenging thing to fix if you have the right plan in place and it's a thoughtful way of tackling some of these challenges. And you can think about some of it in terms of automation and again, planning and thinking about this in a more agile fashion than maybe we have in the past. And I'm actually going to turn things over to Jeff now to talk about some of the best practices that we've been seeing.
Awesome. Thanks, Erin. And I think that's such a key point when you talk about why, that organizations start to think, why do I want a single customer view? A lot of times you might hear organizations say, I want a complete view of my customer for any use case. And that might just not be feasible. It might not be technologically possible. It might not even be compliant. So starting with why, I think, is a really key point to take away from Erin's presentation there. So shifting a bit more to the how, I'm going to talk about the 4 common steps of creating a single customer view, and then actually show some screenshots of our single customer view solution built on top of our data quality product, Aperture. So the 4 main steps, these might vary slightly, but it's first, condition the data. Get the data as ready and clean and fit for purpose as possible to maximize the potential match. So this is parsing, standardization, making sure that city and state are not combined, that we're really giving us the best possible chance of creating a match and fixing any data quality errors that might affect that. And before we go into the cluster and match, which really is the glue tying records together. So there's a lot of ways that organizations do this. We have probabilistic, deterministic models, fuzzy match logic, rules, all kinds of, this is a very complex thing to tie together records, but it's really the meat of a single customer view solution. And then again, you got to think about what is the use case and what is the appropriate model to create that linkage. Third is group, view, and search. And really, this is your business processes. So you've gone through, you've created your linkage, your potential matches. Now what? So going back to the why, you're performing your analytics, you're creating population segmentation, you're taking advantage of your linkage and the new insights that you've gained. And then lastly is harmonization. We've now tied together these records. We say that there's multiple instances of Jordan. How do we know what is the best contact information for her? And that's a matter of deciding which data source might be the most reputable, which contact records are most complete, and then pushing that out to other systems and databases and wherever that data needs to go to be actionable. So we're going to look at each of those quickly. Again, this is in the context of Experian Data Quality's single customer view package built on top of Aperture. And the first slide here is showing just a setup slide to show that we can ingest data from multiple sources. Erin, on the first slide, was showing that organizations have up to 19 different databases. So how many of those need to be tied together? How many of them need to be pulled in? Not to mention all the lists that might be purchased. We might have data coming from third-party sources. Whatever the purposes of your single customer view, you can ingest them into a single platform and then perform the following steps. So next, we would go into our conditioning. So this is showing the results of the conditioning step. There's lots that happen behind the scenes in validation and parsing and standardization, and we're doing transformations in the steps to make sure that our date, for example, is all in the same field. What we're showing here is actually pretty good data hygiene on email, phone, and address. All those fields will be used to do our linkage. So if this was inverse, if the data quality was not good, if the fields were invalid, then maybe we want to stop before we go into our cluster and match and correct that so that we give ourselves the best possible match, the best chance of match in the clustering. So this is a dashboard that shows the results of cluster and match. So again, you might hear it called pinning or keying or identity resolution, linkage. It's all tying records together. And so this is a dashboard that shows we have 223 unique records. I'm sorry, records total. 215 are unique, and 6 are duplicates. 3 are exact, 3 are close. Because we are implementing fuzzy rules-based logic, we can set that threshold of close so that we can look at potential matches. This would be really important as we go and search and try to match on the data set. So after this, we now have our duplicates established. We have our address keys, we have individual keys, and we can start to interact with the data and get that business insight, start to figure out where do we want to go next? How do we make that, how do we either go into our next step of harmonization? How do we create a duplicate store so that you can go in and query, perform our analytics, drill down, gain more insights into where are those duplicates coming from. This is where you can get really in depth with your data and start planning your next step. So even if you're on a journey to a single customer view, this is kind of a good first step to determine what is the current state of my data and what is the current state of my data in different lists, different databases, et cetera. So another example of search and match is a real-time lookup. So since we have conditioned what we call our duplicate store, we can now query against that duplicate store. So again, thinking about our business processes, are we looking to match, make sure that applicants don't have an existing relationship with us? Do we want to make sure that someone signed up for new services doesn't have previous bad debt with us before we onboard them? Lots of applications for this real-time match, but this search match real-time lookup, that is all enabled and achievable because of those previous steps that we've done in single customer view. And then lastly is the harmonization. And this is where it could get a little tricky, but there's a lot of value here. As we're highlighting here, we're showing 3 different instances of Ashley, different spelling each time, likely different contact data associated with her. But we need to find a way to persist the best contact data for your business purposes. If you're going to reach out to her through multiple channels, we want to make sure we have consistent contact data. So the harmonization aspect, but you might also hear that as golden record, is the best contact after you've established your single customer view. So that's just a really quick run through of how we can go about creating a single customer view, especially in the context of our product after Data Studio. So with that, I will hand it back over to Jordan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeff and Aaron, for that background on single customer view, the role data quality plays. I find it fascinating how single customer view can really stretch across different purposes within the business. And I think it can really help someone scale their data programs. So fascinating stuff. Thank you so much. And now we are going to get into the fireside chat portion of our webinar. So we do have some prepared questions for our experts here. But of course, if any of you listening in, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A function on your screen and we'll get to them after this. So let's get started. All right, so the first question, and I remember when I saw this, in the industry research that our team was doing, and we found that searches for a single customer view 2 years ago started at 15 accounts were searching single customer view, and then now it's over 1,000 accounts that are searching for this term. And we found that that was a pretty incredible increase to happen just over the last 2 years. And so, Aaron, you talk to a ton of analysts on the day-to-day. So we're trying to understand what are the trends that are really driving this expansion.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, right? So there are a few factors, and we're seeing a lot of interest around a number of technologies related to this as well. I think one is that increased move that I mentioned before to better utilize data, right? We've moved and seen more growth in digital channels. There's less personal in-person touch. We're seeing a need for more data to kind of tailor those digital experiences, but it goes beyond that, right? I mentioned that before in the lead up, but this increased use in thinking about single customer view also comes from a need and a desire to increase automation, right? We're all living through a point where there's a competition for talent. Many of us are in organizations are dealing with various issues around staffing right now. If we can better utilize data, we might be able to make our existing resources and employees happier, more efficient. All of that plays a role, but automation has challenges, and data quality play a critical role in getting those models trained, in getting there to ensure that there's not bias in the models, also making sure that they're effective, right, and testing those. So that kind of dealing with staffing and interest in automation certainly comes into play as well. There's increased interest in data moving into the cloud. That comes into play as well, because you're seeing more diverse data sources. And how do we start, as I talked about before, that distributed data architecture, how do we start to pull that together? In the marketing arena, we're seeing a lot of increased interest in data usage. I'm not sure if anybody on the call is aware of the term data deprecation. There's the idea that certain identifiers that we're used to using, maybe cookies and other things, there's increased privacy awareness, regulation. There's fewer identifiers in general around a customer than marketers used to have. And so marketers are looking to collect more data on customers. How do we pull that together and use it? Equally, we're also seeing some conflict around single customer view. I hear from a great many analysts that single customer view initiatives have frankly been around for a long time. They've not necessarily been successful. And so, they're cautioning that, if you're starting one of these initiatives, there needs to be a lot around best practices and understanding common pitfalls. And with the analyst community putting that message out there too, seeing more people in search of best practices and maybe starting that journey, hitting some of those roadblocks that we've mentioned before on the call, and then trying to figure out how to address those. I think all of those things overall are contributing to issues around single customer view. But Jeff, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there.
Yeah, definitely. Technology migration is really important to make we see a lot of legacy platforms and customers moving. The first step is understanding the relationship among those records and the quality and cleaning up before we migrate. The only thing that I would add and expand on is the data sharing. That is a major trend that's accelerating the use of sandboxes where organizations want to bring data together in an anonymous fashion or in a way that we maintain privacy. Still, matching and single customer view is the essence behind linking those records together. So I think data sharing, we heard earlier that party data is really important. All of that, all those business aspects start with single customer view. So I think you're right on there, Aaron.
Awesome. Very cool, guys. It's really, again, awesome to see how single customer view is used across the business. And Jeff, what you're saying about data sharing, and Aaron, what you're saying about getting a single customer view into marketing teams and how they're using it. I find it really important to see how data is being used in these untraditional data IT type or non-IT type functions, and really organizations on that trend to becoming data-driven across their entire business. So awesome. Our next question is around terminology. So Jeff, you mentioned this in your presentation, but there's a lot of terms that come with single customer view. So of course, the one we've been using, single customer view, but we also hear identity resolution, golden record, customer 360, universal view. So curious about your thoughts on how these all tie together.
So in my openings, I mentioned there's a lot of nuance in this space, and I think that's a great example in terminology and nuance. And we tend to hear customer 360 a lot in marketing use cases, and where your organizations are trying to understand all elements about a consumer or a potential customer. And this could involve purchasing demographic data, purchasing spend data, modeling this consumer, and then tying together. So customer 360 I tend to think more of retail. Single customer view is a kind of broader term, and I'm trying to keep this high level because it can get very deep very quickly. And then identity resolution is really the process of combining records. So identity resolution can be used to glue records together to create those duplicates for single customer view, for customer 360. And then golden record, I think, is that source of truth is another word for it. So what is the I'm not going to say the true data because that's not possible, but the best possible record, the best possible email for this consumer. And so I think that's kind of how they all tie together. But we definitely hear universal ID, customer 360, single customer view. We hear that all the time. So again, what's really important is to think about the why, and then the term is a little bit less important. And I don't know if you want to expand on that or clarify.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think the only thing I would add too is you'll see with those, as Jeff mentioned, there's nuance here, right? And so all of these are talking about pulling data together in some sort of fashion, right? I often think of identity resolution. There's actually technology suites that are coming out very specifically saying they're identity resolution technology pieces that, you'll hear about an identity graph in the marketing space and various identities coming together and being able to ping different identities on an individual that, again, very specific kind of technology suite. Golden record, as you talked about, what is that, golden record? I hear that a lot with master data management and that kind of technology suite, but it goes beyond that. You just hear that very commonly used in that kind of technology sector. I think all of these terms, again, are slight variations on the same concept. We've tried to call it different things, right? As I mentioned, many of us have started this journey of pulling data together, thinking about, having this one view of the customer, and we've run into roadblocks and challenges. So for many times, as it happens in the technology and in the data space, we're coming up with new terms to reinvent some of the things that we've already been trying to tackle. And I think one of the challenges that I think is interesting and why we've come up with all this variation is that a lot of times for single customer view, we've just been doing it for the sake of having a single view of the customer without a clear expectation in mind or a specific business outcome that we want to achieve. And so you end up having this, concept that's really hard to achieve and very rarely perfect. And so I think we keep trying to change the name to introduce a new concept that maybe isn't really new. Again, there's a lot of nuance there around different slices and dices around those terms. But again, I think we're kind of eventually getting at the same thing here.
Yeah, so this is a nice lead into the next question because, it sounds like there are a lot of nuances, and at the end of the day, single customer view comes off that it's complicated. And so with that, why is it worth doing it, and why is it so important?
Yeah, I'll start with that, Jeff, if that's okay with you. When we talk about trying to create a single customer view, again, we're often thinking about how do we have this data that is, fitting all business needs. And, again, is it worth having the data ready to go to solve specific use cases? Absolutely, but it is never going to be perfect, and we're never going to get it where, again, one set of data is going to be usable by every person. There's always more data coming in. Data is a living, breathing thing. It lives everywhere across the business. It is constantly changing, and so there is always a need to re-pull information together. You're looking at data, Jeff mentioned data sharing. We're looking at data from different sources and in different ways that we haven't thought about pulling together before. And so again, when you think about this concept of pulling this information together, doing it once and thinking that, man, that's going to be it for us is not really feasible. So in a sense, it's more about, it's worth doing, but we've got to change the way that we're thinking about it. You're always going to need to pull data together for a given activity. You're going to want to better understand the customer from different perspectives. The question is, how are you going to go about doing that? What are the rules that govern the combination of that data? What's the sensitivity level of that data? What are some of the parameters around it? We've been doing these types of things for a long time, but again, we're going to have to be thinking about doing this more often. And one of the things I heard recently at an analyst conference was they talked about this idea of having small data sets. Again, thinking about agile development principles in a product, doing the same thing with data. How do we have minimal viable data that we can use to make a decision or gain an insight? How do we combine data that's really critical and certain data sets together and get that deeper understanding of the customer, trying to figure out the right data that we need with the best rules, rather than trying to boil the ocean and think about all the data and pulling it together and having that ready to go all the time. So I think it's absolutely worth doing. It's complicated, but I think the way we're trying to do it, thinking we can just do it once, is making it much harder. We need to just take a different approach.
Yeah, and just to expand on that as to why, I know it's hard, why do we have to do it? And I think it really ranges on a spectrum of better experiences, nice to have, to required under regulation and law. So when you think about required under regulation and law, and the credit bureaus are a great example. We get data from lenders all over the country, and we are obligated to ensure that data is reported to the right individual. So that's an example of single customer view that we make best possible efforts to get right. And then another example is analytics and machine learning, AI. It's big trends with modeling and scoring. Example from an organization that's actually not in financial services, but they were undertaking machine learning, artificial intelligence models for when business might go bad. So like a supply chain example. And what they saw was the models were failing because as they started to bring together all the input data, there was no standardization and consistency on what a unit of measure represented. So in one part of the country, that might include, let's say, labor and transportation. Another part of the country, it was just raw materials. So by having, again, we go back to conditioning data and making sure that it is fit for purpose, we're then able to make sure that those use cases, when we start with why is it so important, are met. So I think, again, we see a lot of organizations right now are trying to improve their customer journey, especially their digital first journey. But it goes the whole gamut from customer experience to required under regulation.
Yeah, okay. That makes a ton of sense. And so, Erin, you mentioned this around data. There's a ton of data coming through, and it's clear that we talked about before that data quality is a potential challenge when it comes to a single customer review. What other challenges does an organization face when they implement this type of initiative?
Yeah, there's a number of challenges, and some of it goes a nice lead in again, Jeff, of some of the things that you were talking about, right, around regulation and thinking about, well, can I do this with the data? There was a stat that I saw from Gartner that said 80% of organizations pursuing a 360-degree view are going to face challenges because of data privacy regulations, relying on obsolete data collection methods and the erosion of customer trust. And so, you know, there are privacy risks and regulations. There are regulations around maintaining and having PII, personally identifiable information, that type of data, and they keep changing. And if you don't have proper consent and you aren't thinking about protecting that information, collecting too much data related to that can be a problem. There's also concern around data collection methods. What do those look like? You know, when we lose some of the identifiers that maybe we're using today, like cookies or something, what is that going to mean? If you are to forward with using the data, it can look creepy. It can erode the customer trust, right? You've got to think about how you're using this information and personalizing. So sometimes when you don't have the right strategy or a clear objective for what you want to get out of a single customer view, you can have this issue where you have significantly more effort that is required with a decreasing benefit of what you're going to get out of it. And so again, there are always ways to make significant improvement for marginal effort. It's just about finding the right balance. But again, there's a lot of challenges that organizations face, and this data landscape keeps changing pretty rapidly.
Yeah, and agree with all those points. I think another thing to stress is just data silos, and silos within organizations. So a lot of times those silos are purposeful, that data should not transfer between organizations. A lot of times organizations silo, business units might be incentivized differently. So it's really important to get a single customer view for marketing, and we need all this data, but it's not super important for someone else. So I think, again, we keep harping on it, but starting with why is really critical to set up a successful single customer view program.
Definitely. So we've been focusing a lot around potential challenges and how single customer view might be a tad complicated when you're just getting started, and focusing on that why. So now I want to look to the future. So what is the future of single customer view?
So I think I'll start here. I think the future is going to be different. I think there can't be a world where we're just looking, again, as I've mentioned before, at just pulling the data together in a very static way. We've got data lakes, we've got data hubs, we've got mainframe systems, we've got spreadsheets, we've got CRM, right? Data is constantly in motion. And if you're going to think about building a single customer view and putting rules in place, this is going to be an evolving and changing thing based on the given use case and that why that we have been stressing. So again, today, a lot of us think about this concept of single customer view being this very static, we're going to pull this data together and it's going to live in one central hub, and this is where it's going to be, and we're all going to pull from this. I think, again, this is going to change. So I think an example would be if you want to automate a billing process, right? And you're pulling accounts together in a billing format, you might use very specific identifiers to pull customer information together by an individual or a household. That's one way to look at the data. A marketing campaign is going to be very different, and the way that you look and how you're going to use the data, they're for two different purposes. It's very different, and the systems that you want to pull the data from and the types of data that you're going to pull together may be very different. And so if you're going to pull data together for that view of the customer, it needs to be for a specific task. It needs to be very agile. And I think the way in which data lives within our systems and the way that we're sharing and pulling information together is going to be different, where we're going to have to think about this in a far more agile way than we have in the past. And changing, consumer behaviors, changing privacy regulations are only going to make this challenge more acute, where we're going to have to think about this differently.
Yeah, and I think the future is actually quite positive to consumers. And I think that the privacy trend, putting the consumers first, is all outstanding. And as a consumer, we're all consumers. I don't want to have my records and re-enter my information and tell organizations that I've already tell my doctor's office that I've already had X, Y done, and they just know that. So I think privacy centric will be really, really key. Putting the consumer first is going to just open up all kinds of better and more experiences, better customer journeys, better flows. And so I think the organization all organizations are going to be tasked with how do we balance that privacy and security with best experiences. But I think overall, the future for a single customer view is better experiences, better journeys, very consumer centric and friendly flows, and just overall positive to us.
Thank you guys for that insight. So one last question for our fireside chat here. Where do organizations get started? How do they get started?
I want to say first, it's what Jeff and I have both been stressing, right? It's the why. Identifying the use cases. Why do you need to pull information together to get an understanding of the customer? This is also keeping in mind, this is going to be an ever evolving list. So I would also say to get started, think about the types of data that you have today and understand the quality of that data. If you have poor quality data, it's going to be really hard to pull it together in any sort of meaningful way. And so the data prep and the data hygiene, while we want to automate that as much as possible, and many of us don't want to spend the time doing it, we want to spend the time on the analytics and on the insight. It's really important. It's really foundational stuff. So in my mind, there's two places to get started: the planning in terms of understanding your use cases, and then really thinking about the data hygiene. Next you can start thinking about what data are you going to pull together. As I mentioned, this is going to change based on the use case, based on the requirements, based on the regulations, but making sure you think about what types of data you need to get at what you want, and then thinking about agile ways to do this. What processes can you set up that will be repeatable? Where can you automate? How can you pull information together in an easier fashion? So you're able to change maybe how you pull the data together each time based on the use case or the types of data you're pulling in, but you don't have to re-engineer the process every single time that you're pulling the data together. But I would say the biggest things that I think a lot of people get wrong and things to do right up front, again, are the why of thinking about the use cases and that data hygiene aspect. So again, you could pull the information together.
Yep, exactly. Why, and start with the hygiene. And I think to get even a little bit more granular about that data hygiene, data quality profiles, I think Jordan and I mentioned that on the previous webinar. We showed an example, are a really good first step. We kind of propose them for all journeys that we talk with customers about, whether that's data migration, looking at improving process flows, models, obviously bringing data together, is what is that current state, and understanding where you are today, where your organization's data is today, is really, really important. So I think starting with a data profile is a relatively easy thing to do, and gives you a lot of good information. So it can tell you, especially as we look at maybe the purchase of an outside list, what is the data quality on that list before we bring it in and try to match? Are we looking at multiple formats that are going to result in poor match rates? So again, always starting with why, and then the first step that I would recommend is understanding the current state of your data, looking at uniqueness, completeness. Are we missing a bunch of fields? And then from there, what we can do is actually drill down into isolate those records that shouldn't be there. So is there test data that shouldn't be there, or are there nuns at nuns.com, none at none.com emails that should be removed. 123 Main Street in your data set. Those kind of placeholders or fields that won't do your organization any good as you go into the single customer view. So as a first step, I would recommend that, and then understanding what is the use case, and then looking at what's the appropriate tool for the cluster and match. There are really great, amazing identity graphs out there that can be used for tying together records with referential data and just the best levels of match. And if your organization doesn't need that for this use case, then it might not be the right solution. Conversely, if your organization does need the highest levels of confidence, then a simple fuzzy match logic solution may not be correct either. So really understanding what level of certainty, what level of display do I want? Do I want to see my potential matches, or do I only want to see 99% confident matches? So having that set up going in prior, it could be really valuable and help avoid some of those pitfalls that Aaron mentioned earlier.
Awesome. I think that was a great analysis of how someone can get started on this and keeping data quality top of mind, because you're right, Aaron, it's really foundational, and you can't push forward and be confident in your reports if you're not sure that the data is right. Great. So we're ready for a Q&A section. I see a few questions coming in so far. So this one is a good one, and I think it's a good lean in from the question we just had. So this company, it seems like they just got started on their single customer view initiative. They've been at it for a while. So as they're going through ramping up this initiative, what are those key metrics of success that they could watch out for?
I think I would say as well, it kind of starts with the use case in my mind, right? And one of the common challenges that I hear is we don't necessarily do a good job of doing data storytelling within our organizations and telling the story that data provides. And so when I think about metrics, it's about layering these metrics up to what your leadership team cares about, which ultimately goes back to the use case that you start with. So is it, you're looking at the success of a given marketing campaign, and what did conversion lead? How much revenue did you bring in? Did pulling that data together and providing that insight for personalization lead to a better outcome in the campaign? Did you see a campaign lift, right, from your marketing effort? Did you see an increased ability to be able to bill more customers? Did you see where service scores went up because you were arming your customer service team with better insights, right? So you can look at metrics around how many profiles did we pull together, or the types of records, or what did we do to improve the quality level. Those kinds of data quality metrics can be really impactful, but you want to tell the story that's going to matter to your leadership team. And if you take it back to that core use case as to why you're doing this and pulling the data together, and did that yield a better outcome, that is going to help in terms of showing the actual success of the campaign, way more than saying we have X, Y, and Z data quality metrics in terms of how we improve the data or we match this number of records. Because the common challenge is if you take that to an executive, it's going to kind of fall on deaf ears because they're not going to know what you're talking about. They want to see what the business outcome is. So in my mind, go to your use case and see what metrics you can tie to that use case. Have some of those data quality metrics too, so you can show that if need be, but ultimately it's going to be about what matters to the wider business.
Yeah, I was struggling with that, so I'm glad you took the first shot, Aaron. But that actually reminds me, what story you're trying to tell. So in some cases, you should have 0 duplicates in a data set. And if you have 1, then that's a problem. So really understanding what is your hypothesis going in. If you have a checking accounts, and you should not have any duplicates in there, or some kind of account where there should be no duplicates in there. Your KPIs improvements. How do we deal with those? How do we process them? How do we automate it so those are flagged? And then on the flip side, it might be we want as high match rate as possible. So again, we talked about data sharing, data purchasing lists. So we want our hypothesis going in is that we want an X, let's say 85% match rate. Anything above or below is not good. And then if we see an above or if we see below, we can drill down, see what needs to be corrected so that we can get it as close to our target or above as possible.
Great. All right, one more question because we're coming up at the top of the hour. So we talked a lot about use cases and how data is working across different departments, but which industries could single customer view benefit the most?
Jeff, I'll let you take this one first.
So I think I recently talked to a construction company, and they needed a single customer view of their vendors. So their contractors, suppliers, they had duplication as their procurement and buying teams would just enter the same supplier. So they needed to be able to know how much they spend with each supplier and contractor. Therefore, they needed a single vendor view. Obviously, financial services, we see this all the time. Retail, government is a really good example as well. I'd be hard pressed to think of one that doesn't need it.
Yeah, every industry, by and large, unless you're in the manufacturing space, and even then, more manufacturers are looking at customer data than ever before of the end users of their products. I mean, I agree with Jeff, you're hard pressed to find an industry that isn't looking to pull data together in some fashion. And you can even, again, depending on the use case, it might be suppliers, it could be product data. You can be looking at different types of information. It doesn't, we use the term single customer view here, but it can be a single view of whatever you want and pulling data sets together to get at a business outcome, right? And so there could be lots of different ways that you slice and dice that. The use cases and possibilities are endless. So it really can go to any industry and any type of business benefits from this type of data infrastructure.
And one last plug for our product before we wrap up. Aperture, we have built this product so that it's data agnostic. So as we think about those different use cases, the different verticals, we're able to take in any structured data and run this type of analysis. So if we need to match on vendors, we can. If we're matching on consumers, we can. So anyone that is on or views this and is interested in learning more, we're happy to run demos or show you potential duplicates in your data set.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for sharing your thoughts and your expertise on single customer view, the importance of data quality. Sounds like this can be used across all of the use cases, all the departments and industries. So we hope that you all listening in see the benefit of single customer view. And as Jeff mentioned, always feel free to reach out to us, find us on LinkedIn, contact us. We're here to help you with your data and get you that single view of anything that works that you want for your use case. Awesome. Have a great day.